The purpose of this CE is to introduce the Blue Card Incident Command Training and Certification Program, standardize the meaning of terms associated with Blue Card, and familiarize the entire fire department with some of the new terms they will be hearing. The entire Blue Card IC training and certification program is based on the textbook Fire Command written by Alan Brunacini. The first edition of Fire Command was released in 1985. It was updated with the second edition in 2001. The command function overview goes over the main points of the online training module. The 8 functions of command provide the incident commander with a standard, predictable, sane, and lucid job description. Command procedures give the incident commander responsibility for overall incident results, along with the organizational authority putting all the incident responders to work in the same common set of tactical objectives. In order for this basic incident management game plan to be effective, all responders must follow an agreed upon, written down in guideline form, practice set of command procedures prior to the event. This is particularly crucial in view of the quick, fast-moving, dangerous incident conditions where this system will be applied. The incident command system must be applied to every incident. The ongoing, everyday, every event use of the system makes it a regular, habitual way of managing all emergency responses. We will review the 8 functions of command, looking at issues regarding to deployment, the assumption, confirmation, and positioning of command, situation evaluation, determining strategy and creating an incident action plan, fireground communications, the organization, reviewing, evaluating, and revising our incident action plans, and the continued support and termination of the command process.
As more and more Harris County Fire Departments work mutual aid incidents together using the Blue Card system, it's imperative that we're on the same page with terminology.
The following represents a list of new or possibly redefined terms that are commonly associated with the Blue Card training program.
The foundation of any IMS system is staging. Staging procedures create a safe and standard operational beginning. If workers begin to assign themselves to a place or function unknown to the IC, they make themselves unaccounted for freelancers, and eventually, sooner or later, will become out of balance with the IC's overall incident action plan. The essence of incident control is the ability of every boss to create, manage, and if necessary, move the position and function of the resources he or she is responsible for. So the definition of staging is this. Staging is the act of positioning the apparatus around an event that enables the incident commander to deploy the assigned resources as needed to address the critical fireground factors. Of course, the first engine, ladder, and district chief can all respond directly to the incident. Everyone else should level 1 stage. To clarify level 1 staging is this. Units respond in their direction of travel, they stay uncommitted, and they stay approximately 1 to 2 blocks from the scene. Apparatus shouldn't pass their last tactical objective when staging. For example, engines should not pass the last hydrant, and ladders should not pass the last access point. Level 1 staging is in effect with the delivery of an initial radio report. We use level 2 staging for resources that are dispatched to an incident beyond the first alarm assignment. Level 2 companies respond to a formal staging area designated by incident command. The staging area should be close enough to allow quick response but far enough away so as not to interfere with the event operations. The staging area will be supervised by a staging officer and will be dispatched on a separate radio channel. The 3-deep deployment model. The 3-deep deployment model provides command with a staffing solution that allows for an uninterrupted work cycle with each attack position. This deployment model enhances the incident organization and hazard zone communications by ensuring that there are enough resources in 1. the hazard zone, 2. on deck, and 3. in staging to address all the critical fireground factors. This graphic is an example of the 3-deep deployment model. As you can see in the graphic, there are 3 companies working inside the hot zone. There are 2 companies on deck, and there are 6 companies in level 2 staging. An incident commander should make sure there are enough resources in all 3 levels of the 3-deep deployment model in order to address the critical fireground factors. On deck. On deck is an integral part of the 3 deep deployment model that places resources adjacent to attack positions but outside of the hazard zone. The primary role of the initial on-deck company is as a rapid intervention team. On-deck assignments are given to companies in a forward staging area that can be rapidly deployed to relieve existing crews, reinforce an attack position, or to cover another attack position in a specific division. So basically, what is on deck? On deck is just another word for forward staging. Once an IC is deployed, all the resources needed for each division, the IC should consider putting companies on deck as forward staging, as a ready reserve for the crews that are working inside. Tactical reserve. A tactical reserve is the most critical piece of the 3 deep deployment model. Incident commanders must have enough resources to address all the critical fireground factors, reinforce attack positions through on-deck assignments, and maintain a reserve in staging to safely manage the incident. Recycling is a timely and efficient means of air replacement and rehydration. Recycling occurs outside the hazard zone in the division the company is assigned. Members that have exited the hazard area prior to the low air alarm sounding are eligible to recycle. The difference between rehab and recycle needs to be clarified. Rehab is the function and location for medical evaluation and treatment, food and fluid replenishment, and relief from extreme climatic conditions for emergency responders based on the circumstances of the incident. Members that fail to exit the hazard area prior to the low air alarm sounding should report directly to rehab. Air management was created by NFPA 1404, the standard for fire service respirator protection training. The purpose is to specify the minimum requirements for respiratory protection training for the emergency response organization, including safety procedures for those expected to be involved in fire suppression. Individual air management programs should include the following directives. Individuals shall exit from an IDLH atmosphere before consumption of reserve air supply begins. 2. Individuals shall recognize that the low air alarm notification indicates that the member is consuming that reserve air supply. And 3. Individuals in the team shall take immediate action upon activation of the reserve air alarm. In other words, NFPA 1404 dictates that we need to be out of the IDLH prior to the activation of the reserve air alarm, or in our case 25% of our air bottle. We can no longer wait until our low air alarm activates to start heading out of the IDLH environment. Work and rest cycles. Work and rest cycles are determined by the operating limits imposed on firefighters by the atmosphere, the PPE, respiratory protection, air consumption, and the hazard zone. The average firefighter can work for 12 to 14 minutes inside the hazard zone before needing to exit the structure to recycle. Depending on the environmental conditions and fitness level of the firefighters, a company work cycle could be 2 to 3 bottles. Companies that complete a work cycle need to report to rehab. Strategic decision-making model. The strategic decision-making model is a standardized sequence of decision-making that allows the first arriving officer to effectively size up the situation. It is a means of evaluating the needs of the incident based on the critical fireground factors. The strategic decision-making model provides incident commanders with the tools needed to continually evaluate the strategic, tactical, and task-level needs of the operation while effectively mitigating the hazards and keeping firefighters safe. This is an example of the strategic decision-making model. The critical fireground factors dictate the risk management plan. The risk management plan dictates the overall strategy of the incident, which creates the incident action plan and leads to the tactical priorities or guidelines that are employed to mitigate the incident. So what are the critical fireground factors? The critical fireground factors represent an array of dynamic issues that must be evaluated continuously throughout the event. The importance of each particular factor will change as the event progresses. The factors fall into one of two categories. They're either fixed or they're variable. In the following slides, we'll talk about each one of the critical fireground factors. This is a list of all the critical fireground factors. As you can see, on the left are the fixed factors and on the right are the variable factors. We need to consider the fixed factors, and then we need to manage the variable factors. One of the fixed factors is the building itself. Some of the things that we need to consider are the size, the interior arrangement, construction type, age, condition, value, compartmentalization or separation inside the building, outside openings, utility characteristics, effect the fire has on the structure, time projected on the fire effects, and how much is left to burn. The second fixed critical fireground factor that we should evaluate is the occupancy type of the building. Some of the things that we should consider are the specific occupancy type, the value associated with the occupancy, the status, whether it's open, closed, occupied, vacant, abandoned, or under construction, the type of contents, the time of day since it affects the use, loss control, and morale hazard. The last fixed critical fireground factor that we need to evaluate is the arrangement of the building or buildings. Some of the things that we need to consider are the distance of external exposures, the combustibility of exposures, the access and arrangement of internal exposures, the value of the exposures, the most dangerous direction of fire extension, the fire effect on the exposures, barriers or obstructions to operations, limitations on apparatus movement between buildings, and whether or not there are multiple buildings. One of the variable critical fireground factors that we need to consider, of course, is the fire itself. We need to look at the size, the extent of the fire, the location of the fire, the stage the fire is in. We need to look at wind direction and speed. We need to look at the most dangerous direction of fire travel. We need to know the time of involvement, the fire load, the type and amount of product left to burn, the product of combustion liberation, what the fire perimeter is, and how widespread the fire is. Another variable critical fireground factor is the life hazard that is currently existing inside the building. So we need to look at the fire control required for search. We need to consider the location of occupants, the number of occupants, the condition of the occupants, possible incapacities of the occupants, resources required for search, any EMS needs we might have for when occupants come out, the fire effect on the victims, any exposures that we have, the hazards for firefighters, access to victims, and possible escape routes. Our access to resources is also a variable critical fireground factor. We need to consider staffing and equipment on scene, staffing and equipment responding, staffing and equipment available, the estimated time of response, the condition of responders, the capability of personnel, the capability of command staff, hydrants and water location, and built-in protective systems. Another variable critical fireground factor is the special circumstances that we might have. We need to consider the time of day or night, the day of the week, the season, the holidays, any special events that are going on, weather or wind conditions, and any social unrest that might be occurring. The last critical fireground factor that we need to consider is action. We need to consider the effect the water is having on the fire, the effect the current action is having, any areas that are not yet covered, the stage of operations, the remote IC setup, is an effective IAP in place, is an effective organization in place, what's the worst thing that can happen, are operating positions effective, are there enough resources, are we operating safely, and is layering in place? Offensive and defensive strategy. We need to define what offensive and defensive strategy should be. Simply stated, offensive is inside the hazard zone working toward the fire, and defensive is outside of the hazard zone working away from the fire and attempting to cut off the fire and protect any exposures. Some activities that fall under the different categories of offensive and defensive are as follows. Offensive IAP may include rescue, fire control, loss control, and customer stabilization, whereas defensive IAP may include establishing cutoffs, defining hazard zones, searching exposures, and protecting exposures. Fire control, abbreviated as FC. Fire control is anything involving the act of isolating, confining, and extinguishing the fire in the hazard zone. Remember that the number one priority in most cases on any offensive situation is to put water on the fire as quickly and as safely as possible. If we put the fire out, everything else gets better. A couple of other standardized terms that we'll be using are all clear and loss control. All clear is an indication that a specified area of a building or structure is clear of occupants. And all clear can be obtained after the primary search and confirmed as part of the secondary search. Loss control is the act of property conservation on the fire ground. This includes salvage and overhaul activities. Safety zones. The safety zones can be defined using the rule of sixes. Each level of the organization, strategic, tactical, and task, has a different set of safety responsibilities, and no other level can perform the safety functions or responsibilities for any other level. For example, at the task level, each firefighter is responsible for his own personal safety, which is approximately a 6-foot safety zone. The company officer has a responsibility for the whole crew, or an approximate 16-foot safety zone. At the tactical level, the division officer is responsible for everybody within that division, or in other words, about a 60-foot safety zone. And at the strategic level, the incident commander is responsible for everybody on scene, or a 360-degree safety zone of the entire incident. This graphic is a demonstration of the task level of the safety zone, which includes the captain, a 16-foot safety zone, and then each firefighter, each with about a 6-foot safety zone. This graphic is a representation of the tactical level safety zone, which is usually performed by the division officer. In this case, the safety zone includes the division officer and the ICT, and then all the companies working inside of that division, which is approximately 60-foot coverage. And finally, at the strategic level, the area of responsibility includes 360 degrees of the entire incident. This job at the strategic level is usually performed by an incident safety officer. The order model outlines the communication steps we follow to ensure messages are always received and understood despite the rushed or confusing or dangerous conditions we typically face during fireground operations. The order model also standardizes how the incident's participants will exchange two-way radio communications. The following is an outline of how the order model should work on the fireground. First, the sender contacts the receiver. Second, the receiver indicates readiness to receive the message. Third, the sender transmits the message or order over the radio. Fourth, the receiver states the message in paraphrasing format to confirm understanding of the message. And finally, the sender corrects any misunderstandings. Once the communication loop is open with the use of the order model, it's important to close the communication loop in order to free up radio traffic. The following is an example of the order model in use. First, the sender calls the other company. Main Street Command calling Engine 1. Engine 1, go ahead command. Engine 1, I need you to stretch a hand line to the Charlie side to reset the fire in the Charlie Delta corner. Engine 1 receives, stretch a hand line to Charlie Delta corner to reset the fire. There are 6 basic types of radio transmissions on a hazard zone. The first is the initial radio reporting. Second is the follow-up report. Third is assigning units to operating positions or functions. Fourth is command transfers. Fifth is CAN reporting, which stands for conditions, actions, and needs. And finally, strategic shifts, when we're switching from offensive to defensive strategy or switching back the other way. Initial radio reports. The initial radio report is probably one of the most important communications we transmit throughout the entire incident. The first IC begins the command, control, and communication process with a brief initial report that describes the conditions that can be seen from the initial command position. It's usually given by the first engine company from the cab of the first-in engine. This report is directed to everyone else responding to the scene, in addition to advising dispatch of the size-up upon the initial IC's arrival. The initial report also connects those listening in, for example, non-responding companies and bosses still in the station, staff officers and the media, to the initial situation status. The initial radio report should also set off a chain reaction of standard organizational elements. First and foremost, it lets the entire response and anyone else listening to the radio know that someone has arrived to the scene. The incident problem gets identified and the strategy and incident action plan are declared. It also puts an IC in command of the event. Command and communications SOPs are designed with the IC as the central communications player. If the IC can't control incident communications, he or she can't control or manage the incident players. There are 7 basic elements to the initial radio report. Number 1 is clearing the alarm and announcing your arrival on scene. Second, a description of the building or area, size, height, and occupancy type. Third, a description of the problem, nothing showing light smoke, working fire, or defensive fire. Fourth, the initial incident action plan. Any actions taken, including the task location and objective. Fifth, a declaration of the strategy, whether you're going offensive, defensive, or investigative. Sixth, a resource determination. And finally, the assumption and naming of command. The initial radio report should go like this. Engine 1 calling OEC with an initial radio report. OEC says, "Go ahead, Engine 1, with your initial radio report." Engine 1 comes back and says, "Engine 1 is on location of a small 2-story residential structure with a working fire and smoke showing on Alpha and Charlie. Engine 1 will be laying a supply line and advancing a hand line through Alpha for fire control and primary search on the first floor. We will be in the offensive strategy and continue the current response. Engine 1 is assuming Main Street command." Then OEC responds by repeating back the message and paraphrasing it. Received. Engine 1 on location, small 2-story residential structure, working fire conditions, smoke showing on Alpha and Charlie. Engine 1's laying a supply line, advancing a hand line through Alpha for fire control and primary search on first floor. Offensive strategy, continue the response. Engine 1's Main Street command. The initial radio report should directly reflect the strategic decision-making model as we discussed previously. The follow-up report is provided once the initial incident commander, which is usually the engine captain, has exited the vehicle and had an opportunity to make a 360 size-up. It's the last transmission given by the officer before going to work in the hazard zone. The follow-up report should include the following. 1. The result of the 360 size-up. 2. Any hazards identified through the 360 size-up. 3. Changes to the IAP. You need to give task, location, and objective. 4. The first-in apparatus geographic location. And finally, the tick reading before making entry. The follow-up report should sound like this. Main Street Command calling OEC with a follow-up report. OEC says, "Go ahead, Main Street Command, with your follow-up report." Main Street Command says, 360's been complete, and there are 2 floors on the Charlie side. Fire is showing through a window on the first floor. We're redeploying a hand line to Charlie to reset the fire. We're continuing the offensive strategy, and Engine 1 is on the Alpha side. No tick reading. OEC responds by saying, "Received, Main Street Command, 360 complete, 2 floors on Charlie, redeploying handline to Charlie to reset, continuing offensive strategy, and Engine 1 is Alpha, no tick reading." Accountability location. The accountability location is the geographic identifier for the event. Announcing that Engine 1 is on the alpha side establishes the orientation of the structure based on the location of the first-in apparatus. For most incidents, the accountability location will be the addressed side of the structure. Going back to the initial radio report, one of the aspects of the initial radio report is the building description. The building description falls into three basic categories. First, the size, second, the height, and third, the occupancy type. An example of this would be, I have a medium-sized one-story commercial occupancy. Another element of the initial radio report is the size of the structure. Size of the structure should be defined by a standard unit of measure, not the occupancy type. The standard unit of measure in Blue Card is the 200-foot crosslay. We have small, medium, large, and huge, gigantic, or mega-sized buildings. In the next few slides, we'll talk about how to define the size of the structure. If an apparatus is spotted about 30 feet away from the front of a building, the maximum depth that a 200-foot crosslay could go into a building is about 150 to 175 feet. So the way that we define the structure is we ask, what percentage of an area can a 200-foot handline access? If a 200-foot handline can access the entire structure, then the structure is considered to be a small structure. Examples of this would be most residential structures and small warehouses. If a 200-foot handline can reach approximately 75% of the structure, it's considered to be a medium-sized structure. Examples of this would be larger warehouses, apartment buildings, or strip centers. A large structure is one in which a 200-foot handline can cover approximately 15% of the fire area. An example of this would be a large warehouse or a large store. And finally, a megastructure is a structure in which a 200-foot handline can only cover approximately 25% of the fire area or less. An example of this would be a big box store or a very large warehouse. Another way of defining the building description is the height of the building. Use the number of stories to describe the above grade height of the structure. Use the number of sublevels, basements, or parking garages to describe the depth below grade of a structure. Another part of the initial radio report is a description of the problem. One of the possibilities is to say that there is light smoke showing. Remember that there's four key attributes of smoke, which are volume, velocity, color, and density. Light smoke has small volume with little to no push from fire conditions. It's lighter in color and lacks significant density. The presence of light smoke might require the deployment of a pump can or extinguisher along with the utilization of resources from a single company for fire control. A working fire condition is pretty much anything beyond light smoke. A working fire condition requires the deployment of a handline and utilization of resources on scene for fire control. Defensive fire conditions exist when the volume of fire exceeds the resources assigned to the event, or is indicated by the risk management plan, which states, we will not risk our lives at all for what is already lost, neither people or property. Reinforcing interior attack lines more than once should be a red flag to us and an indication that maybe we should go defensive. One of the basic forms of communication on the fire ground is the progress report or CAN report. A CAN report includes conditions, actions, and needs. Regardless of the type of communication, all members must maintain radio discipline. Incident commanders must be able to control the radio traffic on the tactical channel, or they will not be able to control the overall incident. The following will help members maintain radio discipline when assigned to an incident. First, know what you're going to say before pressing the push to talk. Second, only communicate information that pertains to tactical priorities or firefighter safety. Third, allow communication loops to close before pressing the push to talk. Fourth, let the incident commander be the one to contact you. Fifth, end every CAN report with a needs assessment. This also includes your air supply. And sixth, eliminate good news reporting unless requested by the IC. For example, all clears, PARs, etc. are all good news reporting. There are 4 basic types of radio communication between the incident commander and companies on scene. They include routine traffic, roof reports, status changes, priority traffic, and emergency traffic. First, routine traffic is the most common form of communication that takes place on the fire ground. Routine traffic is generally initiated by the IC and it follows the order model. Once assigned to the hazard zone by IC, companies should work to maintain radio silence unless contacted by the command. A CAN report is an example of routine radio traffic. Roof reports are used to provide an assessment or a size-up of the roof to command and companies working inside the structure. The roof report should include the following information. First, the type of roof. Second, condition of the roof. Third, fire or smoke conditions. Fourth, location of firewalls. Fifth, heavy roof loads if there are any. Sixth, conditions in the attic space, if it's known. And seventh, building blueprint or layout. A ladder company that's assigned to the roof should provide a roof report to command soon after making access to the roof. Remember that vertical ventilation must be highly coordinated through the IC, the ladder companies, and the interior crews. Another one of the 4 forms of radio communication is status changes. A status change can occur on the fire ground for a number of reasons and must be provided as soon as possible using the order model. A status change might be necessary for the following reasons. 1. You've completed the assignment and need to be reassigned. 2. You're changing locations within the hazard zone. Or 3. You need to exit the structure to recycle. For example, when an air bottle goes below 50%. Another form of radio communication is priority radio traffic. Priority radio traffic is used for bad news or red flag reporting and should be communicated as soon as possible to the incident commander. Priority traffic should follow the order model, but it can interrupt communication loops if necessary. Some examples of the need for priority radio traffic include the following. You're unable to complete a critical assigned task or tactical objective. You have an urgent need to be reinforced or backed up to completing an assigned task or tactical objective. You've encountered a victim. Roof reports containing info on an unstable roof, imminent collapse, or an attic fire. When you're working in a concealed space and fires are not easily controlled by the locating unit, or a sudden significant incident like a flashover, backdraft, or collapse. The use of emergency radio traffic is reserved for only the incident commander when contacting OEC. If a company is operating in the hazard zone and they have a problem with something, they need to contact the IC with priority radio traffic. Then the IC will determine if the OEC needs to be contacted with emergency radio traffic. Reports of a mayday represent an emergency on the fire ground, and it exists outside the parameters of emergency traffic and priority radio traffic, CAN reporting, and all the other forms of radio communication. A mayday transmission will not follow the order model. A strategic shift happens when IC determines that he needs to go from offensive to defensive operations. The procedure for performing a strategic shift includes the following. First, clear dispatch and ask for emergency tones. Second, emergency tones are transmitted. Third, announce to all hazard zone units that you're shifting to a defensive strategy and that all units need to tactically withdraw or emergency evacuate the structure. Then request that all units report PAR upon exit. Finally, dispatch repeats the emergency traffic report verbatim.